world of slavery. You are legally a slave, just as your parents, your grandparents, and great grandparents were slaves. You may be lucky enough to live in a pleasant plantation with other slaves managed by overseer slaves, such as police, judges, doctors, and politicians, where a few examples of slave cruelty occur. Or you may be witnessing changes in the community plantation, which is part of a state slave plantation and national slave plantation, where there is more crime, more misery, and death. The fact that you are a slave is unquestionable. The only unknown is whether you will permit your children and their children to also grow up as slaves. You're a slave because since 1933, upon a new child being born, the executors or administrators of the higher estate willingly and knowingly convey the beneficial entitlements of the child as beneficiary into the First Estate KV Trust in the form of a registry number, by registering the name, thereby also creating the corporate person and denying the child any rights as an owner of real property. You are a slave because since 1933, when a child is born, the executors or administrators of the higher estate knowingly and willingly claim the baby as chattel to the estate. The slave baby contract is then created by honoring the ancient tradition of either having the ink impression of the feet of the baby onto the live birth record or a drop of its blood, as well as tricking the parents to signing the baby away through the deceitful legal meanings on the live birth record. This live birth record as a promissory note is converted into a slave bond sold to the private reserve bank of the estate and then conveyed into a second separate Cesta KV trust per child owned by the bank. Upon the promissory note reaching maturity and the bank being unable to seize the slave child, a maritime lien is lawfully issued to salvage the lost property and itself monetized as currency issued in series against the Cesta KV Trust. You are a slave because since 1540 and the creation of the first Cesta KV Act, deriving its power from the papal bull of Roman cult leader Pope Paul III of the same year, whenever a child is baptized and a baptismal certificate is issued by the state at birth or church, the parents have knowingly or unknowingly gifted, granted, and conveyed the soul of the baby to a third Cesta KV trust owner by Roman cult, who has held this valuable property in its vaults ever since, managed by the Temple Bar since 1540, and subsequent bar associations from the 19th century representing the reconstituted Gala, responsible as Grim Reapers for reaping the souls, or salvage, also known as salvation of souls. Grim Reapers, anybody? Therefore, under the UCC slave laws, most slave plantations of the world operate, you can never own a house, even though they trick you into believing you do. You never really own a car, a boat, or any other object, or only have the benefit of use. Indeed, you do not even own your own body, which is claimed to have been lawfully gifted by your parents at your birth in the traditions of old slave contracts, in which the slave baby had its feet or hands dipped in ink or a drop of blood spilt on the commercial transaction document we know as the live birth record, against which a QSIP number, these can all be looked up, is issued and sold by the central bank. Yes, the banks claim your flesh. The banks are indeed the modern slave owners, hiding these indisputable facts upon which their money system is built from the people. You may not realize you are a slave under the slave laws of Uniform Commercial Codes, UCC, but may still erroneously believe you are a slave with more rights as used to be afforded under common law until it was largely abolished back in 1933 without properly telling you. The word common comes from 14th century Latin communis, meaning to entrust, commit to a burden, public duty, service, or obligation. The word was created from the combination of two ancient pre-Vatican Latin words, com committo, to entrust, commit, and munis, burden, public duty, service, or obligation. In other words, the real meaning of common as first formed because of the creation of the Roman trust over the planet is the concept of voluntary servitude or simply voluntary enslavement. Common law is nothing more than the laws of voluntary servitude and the laws of voluntary slavery to the Roman cult and the Venetian slave masters. It is the job of the overseer slaves to convince you that you are not slaves. The common law still exists and has not been largely abolished and replaced with commercial law to confuse you, to give you false hope. In return, they are rewarded as loyal slaves with bigger homes to use and more privileges than other slaves. The reason why the overseer slaves, such as judges, politicians, bankers, actors, and media personalities, are forced to lie and deny we are all slaves is because the slave system of voluntary servitude, or common law, was not the first global slave system, but merely its evolution. Before the emergence of common law, We were all subject to being considered mere animals or things under canon law of the Roman cult, also known as the law of the sea or admiralty law. Under admiralty law, you were either a slave of the ship of state or merely cargo for lawful salvage. Thus, in 1302 through Unum Sanctum, the Roman cult unlawfully claimed through trust the ownership of all the planet and all living things as either slaves or less than slaves, with things administered through the court of Rota. This court, claimed as the supreme court of all courts on the planet, was initially abolished in the 16th century, only to be returned in 1908 under Pope Pius X as a purely spiritual ecclesiastical court of 12 apostolic prothonotary spirits, implying the 12 apostles. Since then, this new purely spiritual court has remained in constant session, with the local courts using these powers to administer divine immortal spirits expressed in trust into flesh vessels as mere dead things. Yet this is not the only form of slave law still in force today. Instead, the oldest, the most evil, and based on false history are the slave laws of the Manesha, also known as the Rabbi, through the unholy document of hate first formed in 333, known as the Talmud of the Manesha, the false Israelites. Through the Talmud of the false Israelites, the whole planet is enslaved with the servants of the chosen people, known as Canaanites, Phoenician, or Canaanites, knights, also known as the Scythians, and then the rest as the Goy, Gu, and Goyim, namely meaning the cattle, the dead, lifeless corpses. Ultimately, you are a slave because you remain profoundly influenced by your education and community at large, and because many choose to continue to think and act like a slave, waiting for someone to help them, tell them what to do, and be happy accepting breadcrumbs of benefits when the system has reaped millions of dollars, yes, millions of dollars of your energy. A prison designed with no way out before this time, the system of global slavery and the treatment of the world as one large slave plantation was designed so there is no way out, as evidenced through the courts of the priests of Baal, known as the judges of most legal systems in the world. Even the most educated of men and women may remain tricked into believing that upon self-representation they may claim their common law rights as a means of defense, only to find the judge lawfully rejects any and all claims, as the first law of the courts is the Uniform Commercial Codes of Slavery, as introduced in 1933. The defendant is an employee of a corporation and therefore automatically assumes the liability of any injury. Unless they can pay, they may be sent to prison. If such a trickster as the judge is challenged, they are permitted to escape to their chambers and call upon even greater power to return and magically establish a new court without telling the defendant they have now entered admiralty court or the laws of the sea in accordance with canon law of the Roman cult issued in 1983. This is where you see I've got a video of Judge bows to sovereign when the judge walked out, or the priest of Baal bowed and walked out. He claimed the court because the captain or the judge had left the ship. He claimed the court and dismissed his own case. If he'd hung around, it would have not went well. Now the judge can impose grave penalties upon such an unresponsive defendant, including contempt of court and other punitive prison sentences, with the defendant having no rights unless they know canon law concerning juridic persons and establishing standing above being called a thing. Sadly, few people actually know the original meaning of thing as a judicial meeting or assembly, a matter brought before a court of law, a legal process, a change brought, or a suit or cause pleaded before a court. This meaning is then used with devastating effect through the heretical concept of Pius X from 1908 to claim the dead apostles sit in permanent and open session as the 12 protonotaries of the sacred Rota as the highest supreme court on the planet. So when a man or woman receives a blue or yellow notice from a court issued through this unholy knowledge of canon law, by the time they come to court, they are automatically a thing. When a man or woman seeks to defend themselves by seeking to speak before the judge, they automatically consent to being a thing. This is a judge with knowledge. Thus, a judge with knowledge of such trickery can silence any man or woman by lawfully threatening contempt of court if the thing does not stop making noise. Indeed, it is the Roman cult canon law of 1983 that establishes all courts are oratories, with judges holding ecclesiastical powers as ordinaries and their chambers as chapels. Thus, the bar associations around the world have assisted judges in learning of their new powers in order to counteract those men and women who continue to wake up to their status as slaves, but demonstrating how to remain in honor with such perverse law and ensure such terrorists are sent to prison for long sentences as a warning to others. If a judge so inclined to ensure an educated defendant is lawfully sent to prison or worse, he or she may run away for a third and final time to their chamber and invoke their most powerful standing as rabbi of a Talmud court under the Talmudic laws of the false Israelites of the house of the 12 tribes of Manasseh. Now, even a judge in a nation that is against the death penalty may choose to impose a lawful sentence against any goy or goyim who dares injure an Israelite, which is normally death. However, while judges in the United States and other nations have started to be trained in the reimposition of Talmudic law, it is at the hands of the false Manasseh, also known as the elite anti-Semitic parasites, also known as the Black Khazars and Venetian noble families. Ultimately, it is enough for judges, clerks, and members of the bar to know that they hold our property in their Cesta KV trust and that we are completely without effective rights until we challenge their fraud. Yet even when you challenge their fraud, many deny and outright lie in the records. Yes, judges absolutely committing perjury on the record to deny they hold trustee and executor powers, with the case being a constructive trust and executor of the Cesta KV trust from which powers are being drawn for the form of the court. This is why we use the birth certificate clause of the rebus extantibus to undo the original bond that was done in 1933.